You're listening to Part-Time Genius, a production of Kaleidoscope and iHeartRadio. Guess what, Will?
What's that, Mango?
So one of the great things about working from home is that you can slip away from a stressful day or big meetings and get a little exercise. I know you like to run. I like to play tennis when I can get away. But I was wondering about people who relax by doing more extreme sports. Like if you want to go surfing in the middle of the day and hit the waves, but then get on a Zoom right after, how do you do that without looking like a mess? So I was doing some research and I think I found an answer with this Japanese wetsuit. It's a 100% waterproof bodysuit that also doubles as a business suit.
So does it actually look like a business suit, or is it just like a regular wetsuit with some sort of jacket on top or something like that?
It's like a regular two-piece suit and it's got a button-up shirt, except everything is super stretchy. It's water repellent. I've actually got a picture for you. I'm going to click it over and send it to you right now.
Dude, that is actually pretty awesome. It actually looks pretty sick. I mean, the pants look a little tighter than you typically want them. I know you like your tight
that's
pants.
How I like them.
Yeah, but otherwise, honestly, not bad.
Yeah, and even the accessories are waterproof. So you can go for a waterproof necktie or a waterproof bow tie because we deserve nice things, and it is nice to have options.
It's true. I actually think this would be one case where I would go with the bow tie because you don't want the like necktie slapping you in the face as you're going through this. But I'm curious to know, like, how did this business, like these formal wetsuits come about?
Apparently it's a collaboration between Quicksilver in Japan and this Tokyo-based ad firm. And the goal was to figure out a way to get former surfers back into the sport. Surfing is hugely popular in Japan, but 90% of young surfers give it up once they get day jobs. So the hope was that if salarymen can have some way that they can get in the ocean, but then get to the office right after, sort of like from the board to the boardroom, they can slip surfing back into their lives.
And has this worked?
No.
Okay. All right. Well,
it is a much better gimmick than it is office wear. But stumbling into this outfit made me think about how much I've always wanted to do a surfing episode. Even though I am not a surfer, I thought we should get one out before the summer is done. So why don't we grab our boards and dive in?
All right. Hey there, podcast listeners. Welcome to Part-Time Genius. I'm Will Pearson, and as always, I'm joined by my good friend Mangesh Hattikudur. And on the other side of my computer screen, hanging 10 on his ironing board. He's gotten creative here, Mango. That's our friend and super producer, Dylan Fagan. And for any concerned listeners out there, and I know you're often concerned with the stunts that Dylan is pulling, you should know that the ironing board is not extended. It's flat on the floor, and he's balancing on top of it. I think he wants to be protective of, his dainty ankles.
Yeah,
this is a fun fact about super producer Dylan.
Very concerned about his ankles always. Yeah.
So Mango, this topic has kind of been sitting in the queue for a long time for us, and I'm curious, why have you been wanting to do a show on surfing?
I'm not exactly sure. I think it's because surfing is one of those things I want to do so badly. It is so beautiful and calming, and I love watching people surf, but also I'm absolutely never going to do it. Actually, this last year, my friend got married in Hawaii and I'd never been. And there was an afternoon where we caught up on a beach and we just watched people surf for like hours.
Oh, it's the best.
And it was mesmerizing. And it's just unbelievable how long people can go for when they really know how to surf. It's stunning.
I agree. But what's stopping you from trying?
Well, I am not a great swimmer, and I don't see a lot of people surfing in floaties.
I actually knew that. I just wanted you to have to say that.
But also, it just feels so dangerous. I mean, it is maybe irrational, but I read this surf memoir. It's called Barbarian Days, and it's by William Finnegan, this New Yorker writer. And it's beautiful, but there's this scene where the author goes to some remote place near Fiji, and the ocean is in this area, and it's filled with super venomous water snakes.
Oh, God.
But because the waves are so good, he just keeps surfing. And, between water snakes and sharks and the way his skin tears up on coral, I just think I'll stick to tennis.
Yeah.
But I still do like facts about surfing, and I'm curious where you want to start today.
Actually, before we jump into that, I'm not trying to delay us any more from surfing, but It made me think about this. Have you actually seen these photos of Swiss people commuting home from work by floating on the Rhine? Have you seen these?
It is unbelievable. Like those images were all over TikTok this summer, and it kind of looks magical.
It really does. So I guess in Basel, Switzerland, they've got these little cabins for changing and there's showers along the route. And basically commuters will strip down, throw their belongings in these waterproof floating bags. They're shaped like fish, and then they just float home.
Like fish.
Yeah, it's so cool. And it feels like such a nice way to end every summer workday. Think about this. If every day, instead of going and getting on the train or whatever we're doing to get home, to be able to do that. And that's just an aside, but I thought it was worth sharing here. But why don't we start by talking about some of the early accounts of surfing? I know we like to go back to the very beginning on so many of these things, but the first European writing about surfing comes from a man named Charles Clerk. He served as a ship's officer on one of Captain Cook's voyages through the Pacific. This was back in 1778, and Cook and his crew became the first known Europeans to visit the Hawaiian Islands. So they were basically the first outsiders to witness surfing. So he writes about this in his journal, and Clerk recounted watching these islanders mount boards that were 6 to 8 feet long, so actually along the lines of what you would see today, 2 feet wide, and he says, quote, in the shape of one of our bone paper cutters. You know, bone paper cutter, right?
I also can't imagine how wild it must have been to see people just on these like planks, just cruising past you. It feels insane.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so he wrote they basically get on these boards and then, quote, go round the best going boats we had in the space of a very few minutes. So he was definitely impressed. But my favorite account of surfing comes about 100 years later. Mark Twain writes about the phenomenon.
Mark Twain went to Hawaii?
He did. He did go to Hawaii. And so he writes about this in his travel memoir called Roughing It. And he also did a bunch of correspondence for the Sacramento Union when he traveled through Hawaii and wrote about everything from missionaries to sugar operations to local lore. But what's funny is that he documents surfing and calls it surf bathing. And here's how he describes it. He says, quote, at the right moment, the native would fling his board upon its foamy crest and himself upon the board, and here he would come whizzing by like a bombshell. It did not seem that a lightning express train could shoot along at a more hair-lifting speed. So it's pretty cool to watch. I think he might have been exaggerating just a tiny bit. But what's even better is that Twain actually gives surfing a try. So he was a little more brave than the two of us, and he goes on to write, I tried surf bathing once, subsequently, but made a failure of it. I got the board placed right and at the right moment too, but I missed the connection myself. The board struck the shore in 3/4 of a second without any cargo, and I struck the bottom at about the same time with a couple of barrels of water in me. None but natives ever master the art of surf bathing thoroughly. It's a pretty great story there.
Well, I feel like surf bathing makes it sound like a gentler sport.
It does, yeah.
It feels like you should do that every day.
Yep.
I know you're a much better swimmer than I am because your grandma was like an Olympic swimmer, right?
Well, she might have claimed that she was an Olympic swimmer, but she did teach us all to swim. Thanks, Mama.
So I had no idea that Mark Twain wrote any of this stuff, and I actually just read James. Have you heard that book?
I'm actually about halfway through it. It's a fantastic
so
book.
Good. And honestly, like reading about Huck Finn from Jim's perspective made me want to go back and read more Mark Twain.
Yeah.
And I actually feel like now I've got to start with this travel memoir.
Yeah. By the way, as a side note, you know who recommended James? One of our fantastic podcasters, Danny Shapiro, who does Family Secrets. I always ask her, what books are you obsessing over? And it was that book. Sorry for the side note, but
No, I love it. For my next fact, I want to talk about how surfing started as an equal opportunity family activity. And this goes back to its inception. So surfing in Hawaii and other Polynesian islands was a communal activity, and it's really wonderful. So like men, women, children, like people of every social class did this. And in fact, the oldest known surfboard belonged to a woman. It dates back to the 1600s, and it was found in the burial cave of a princess on the Big Island of Hawaii.
I feel like whenever you hear about surf history in America, it usually starts with that surf legend Duke something or other bringing it to the mainland in the early 1900s. It was Definitely not a story with a woman.
Yeah, so the truth is that Hawaii's surf culture was derailed for a period in the 19th century thanks to American missionaries. They disapproved of just about every aspect of surfing, from the mixed gender nature of it to the fact that you had to be nearly naked to do it well. So the sport kind of fell by the wayside in Hawaii, especially among women. But that started to change at the turn of the century when Californians were introduced to the sport by male Hawaiian surfers. And that includes Duke Anamoku, who I know I'm butchering.
You nailed it. No, I think
we
you got it
both
exactly
know who we're
right.
talking about.
Yeah.
But that said, female surfers never went away completely. And around the same time that surfing made its American debut, and so this is in the 1890s, Hawaii's princess was busy demonstrating the sport in England, and she did it in this grand fashion. She surfed the English Channel. There's a document at the British Surfing Museum that has a great description of it, and it says, quote, "The tall foreign dignitary stood erect on a thin board with her hair blowing in the wind as she rode the chilly waters." It was such an impressive sight that some of the British nobility decided to take up surfing, and before you knew it, the sport had this foothold on a whole new continent.
Oh, that's amazing. Actually, in my research, I found some of the early pictures of the Brit surfing or surf riding, as they used to call it. And they used coffin lids instead of surfboards because there just weren't proper boards available. It's so crazy to see what people used to surf on. Look at this photo here. Like you can see, these are just pulled straight they're either pulled straight from a coffin or they are lids that have not yet been put on a coffin. But
future lids.
Maybe that's what it is. But anyway, speaking of female surfers, did you know that in the 60s, TV surfer Gidget was based on a real person?
I love that you're bringing up Gidget like anyone remembers who Gidget
everybody
is.
remembers Gidget in the time before we were alive.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to explain it.
Yeah. Well, obviously, she's not a household name anymore, but in the late 1950s and early 60s, Gidget was the most famous surfer of them all. Sandra Dee played her in the 1959 movie, and then other actresses took over for the role in the sequels. Sequels like Gidget Goes Hawaiian and Gidget Goes to Rome.
Sure.
You know the usuals.
The classics.
But then in the mid-60s, Gidget got a TV spinoff starring Sally Field. So we are talking about like pretty big actresses here, which very occasionally used to air on TV when I was a kid.
Yeah, I actually vaguely remember that.
Yeah.
And, I'm guessing this was during the height of the surf craze when the Beach Boys had all those songs on the air.
Yeah, and Gidget was the first of those Hollywood beach party films that you think of that were so huge in the 1960s. But one thing that set Gidget apart is that the character was actually based on a real surfer. Her name was Kathy Koner, and in 1956, she was a 15-year-old girl growing up in the suburbs of Malibu. So that summer, she learned to surf by trading peanut butter sandwiches to local surfers in exchange of using their surfboards. Isn't that cool? I love how creative that is.
That's amazing. And I love that like a peanut butter sandwich can get you a ride on a surfboard. That's so great.
I'd love a peanut butter sandwich. Like I would totally trade my board for one. But so by the end of the summer, she was hooked and kept telling her dad about it. And at one point, Kathy told him she wanted to write a book about her surfing experiences. But her dad, being a writer himself, offered to write it for her. So a year later, the first of 5 YA novels about a surf-crazed girl named Gidget hit the shelves, and it quickly became this national bestseller. And within no time, they sold the film rights. So cool.
That's fun. But if her real name's Kathy, why does she get named Gidget?
Well, apparently that's the nickname that those older Malibu surfers gave her. It's a combination of girl and midget, which of course is problematic today, but some of the other characters in the book had better nicknames. Like Gidget's longtime love interest was named Moon Doggy, which I think is actually pretty cool and maybe problematic for other reasons. I haven't thought about it yet, but on account of his fondness for surfing by moonlight, which I think is kind of cool.
Well, I just assumed Gidget was a surf term because there's so many of those that, you have no idea what they mean. And I thought it would be fun, actually, if I gave you a bit of a surf vocabulary quiz, just in case the next time you meet a surfer and your Google Translate doesn't work, you actually have some surfing vocabulary to lean on.
Ready? Let's do it.
So the first one is doggy door. Do you know what a doggy door is to a surfer?
Use it in a sentence.
I thought he was a goner, but then he found that doggy door.
Okay. I'm guessing it's a little gap in the wave or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. So a doggy door is a small exit hole a surfer finds to get out of the barrel of a wave.
All right.
So 1 for 1.
All right.
How about a gremmy?
I have no idea. Give it to me in another sentence.
Sure. I won my game of Scrabble by using the word gremmy.
That is not helpful at all. So what is a gremmy?
I guess I also could have said a gremmy is almost the same as a grommet.
Okay.
Would that have been helpful?
Yeah, still not figuring it out.
A grommet is a young surfer, and a gremmy is an inexperienced surfer of any age. So
Got it.
You'd rather be called a grommet than a gremmy, I guess, but neither is a term of endearment.
Right.
How about a kahuna?
I feel like you hear the phrase big kahuna, or you obviously hear the phrase big kahuna a lot, and it's always around like Polynesian culture. So maybe this is a village chief or something like that?
Yeah, it's pretty close.
Okay.
So a kahuna is apparently a wizard or a magician, and it can also be a wise man or a shaman. So you can see how a kahuna becomes kind of a wizard of surfing on the waves.
Yeah.
So, and the last one I'm going to give you, what is a mush burger?
Well, I know when you finish surfing or playing in the water or anything like that, you're definitely very hungry. So would this be like the sandwiches and chow that you scarf down after riding the waves, and they're maybe all wet from the ocean or sandy? I don't know. I'm trying here.
I love that idea. I do feel like mush burgers would be a great name for a franchise, but a mush burger is actually a slow and fat wave.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
I like the name. So anyway, now that you know all the surf slang, why don't we take a quick break? Welcome back to Part-Time Genius, where we're sharing some of our favorite facts about the fine art of surfing. And Will, I think it's your turn to go next.
All right. Well, you felt like my facts about Gidget were a little dated, and so I'm going to dip into some pop culture that a few more people have heard of, and it's a little show called SpongeBob SquarePants.
Not familiar.
Not familiar? Okay.
So what's your fact?
Yeah, that's pretty great. This does remind me, as a side note, about the time where you told me that you were introduced to Hall & Oates when you were literally introduced to Hall & Oates at that event. And I was like, how did this happen? How are we here and you were not familiar with their body of work? Sorry to call you out here, but
yeah,
guess that just wasn't playing when
that was the first time.
That's pretty. Well, I didn't realize that the SpongeBob creator, Steven Hillenburg, was actually a lifelong surfer and a marine biologist. And
cool.
This comes from a friend of his named Biddle Duke, who wrote a piece about him in the New Yorker. But apparently when Hillenburg wasn't surfing, he was beachcombing and sketching shells and sea life. Anyway, Duke tells this story that he and Hillenburg and a group of friends all used to go to these camping beach trips. And they would go once a year on these trips. And one year they were at this bonfire in Baja. And Hillenburg passes around his journal with an idea that he has. Now, apparently by this time, he's already made an educational comic book about sea life. He's won awards for this. He's done grad school in animation, won awards for that too. And so he's on this path to doing something with marine life and animation. But he opens his book and tells everyone he's going to write a cartoon about a sea sponge. And nobody gets it, right? I mean, you can imagine how people are like, okay. And obviously a sea sponge is like this lifeless, inanimate blob of a thing. And they're like, really? A sponge? Like, is this really what you're going to do? And he tries to tell them that that's actually the gag, that it's going to be about a kitchen sponge who lives in a tide pool and has all these other funny sea creature friends, but no one can see it. And while they all assume he's going to be successful, they just don't think this is the idea.
I mean, it is funny to think of, right? Like the idea that if someone told me they were going to make a cartoon about a sponge, like there's no way I think that was going to be successful.
Totally. I mean, it's genius now, but I totally agree. Anyway, you cut to a few decades later, and SpongeBob is the biggest cartoon on Earth. But even the people at Nickelodeon don't quite understand its success. And when the author goes to reunite with Hillenburg, he wants to ask him, how is it that a sponge managed to capture all these kids' hearts? But Hillenburg at this time actually has ALS, and he doesn't surf anymore, and he can barely get words out, but he's, still surprisingly sunny, and he still goes to the office every day. So Duke goes with him, and when Duke talks to one of Hillenburg's co-writers about what makes the show so captivating, this is what he says. He says, SpongeBob is not cool. He's not aspirational. He just wants to go to work and be happy. There's this innocence to him, and he sees the good in a horrible person. So it's like a pretty great quote there. And apparently Hillenberg's entire goal was to concentrate on simple stories taken from real life experiences. A yearbook picture gone wrong, how a good joke overtold can go wrong. And he was really trying to make a show that was funny and earnest, but he had a moral compass about it. But the sweet guy who just wanted to see the best in people and go to work every day, it seems he was just making a show about himself. And so as Duke Biddle writes, quote, "We all love goofy optimists who don't care what the cool kids think." And that was Steven Hillenberg.
Oh, I love that.
It's pretty awesome.
That's really sweet. So my next fact has none of that charm, but it is interesting.
Awesome. That was a little emotional, so it's time to move on to something less charming.
It's about how researchers are putting surfers to work monitoring the world's oceans. And so you might have heard global warming is doing a real number on the oceans.
Yep.
Creatures who call it home are having a hard time with migration and reproduction and all these other things. And so to really tackle the problem, we still need to amass a lot more data and information. And that's where the surfers come in. So apparently, scientists are outfitting volunteer surfers with a special board-mounted sensor called a SmartFin, PHIN, and then dispatching them to surf spots around the world to do what they do best.
You mean to shred the gnar? I'd actually, while you were saying that, I was Googling some other surfing term. I feel like I said it convincingly, though.
Yeah, so while they're shredding the gnar, they're also collecting data on the temperature, salinity, and acidity of the surrounding waters. And once compiled, scientists will be able to compare those readings and get a better understanding of how the ocean's chemistry is changing over time and what it might look like in the future, which I think is really awesome.
I mean, I can see how this helps the scientists, but honestly, like, what's in it for the surfers? Because I for serious surfers or enthusiasts, I could see how mounting additional gear would, get in the way or be annoying or
slow
something.
You down. Yeah. The researchers behind the project thought of that, and according to one of them, this is what they said, quote, "We built some extra technology into the SmartFin that will compel surfers to use it for their own selfish reasons, to know where and when waves are good and to track their own surfing performance." So, the idea is that all this technology can actually be performance enhancing, and the hope is that everyone wins.
All right, well, here is a quick one. So we've talked a lot about human surfers today, which I guess makes sense, but other animals have also taken up surfing, though none more successfully than the yellow-bellied sea snake. Are you familiar with the yellow-bellied sea snake?
No, I don't know about it.
Its original home was in the ocean waters of Southeast Asia, but the snakes have since been found near Hawaii or Mexico, even an island in the Indian Ocean. And for decades, a big mystery among biologists was how these tiny snakes managed to turn up in tropical waters all over the world. I mean, these guys weigh like 3 to 7 ounces or about 2 feet long. So that's like the weight of your namesake mango, the mango, and about the length of a baguette. You can tell I'm hungry here. I'm going with these. So the question is, how are they crossing the globe?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a long way for a baguette to swim, right? But I'm guessing the answer is surfing?
Exactly. So the theory that's been kicking around since the 1970s, after the time of Gidget, of course. But in 2016, researchers were able to model this path for sea snakes using a computer program that simulates ocean currents. So basically, they took 10,000 virtual snakes. They released them from 28 different points on the map, and then they tracked the path of each group to see where the currents would take them. And, wouldn't you know it, the paths led straight to where the snakes have been found in the real world. And here's the wildest part. If the models are accurate, that means that the snakes are clocking distances of nearly 6,000 miles or more over the course of their 3.5-year lifespans. And for perspective, that would be farther than any other snake species has traveled. It's actually closer to the travel range of, something like a whale.
Oh, wow.
And because the yellow-bellied snakes can hold their breath underwater for the astounding period of 3.5 hours, it actually seems plausible that they surf the waves over from Asia. This is just crazy to me.
3.5 hours underwater is nuts. When you said you were doing something on animals, I was expecting something about surfing dogs, because they've got that competition in Huntington Beach. But I'm kind of glad you went with snakes instead.
Thank you. Got to keep people on your toes. So what is your very last fact of the day?
So I think one of the things we often associate with surfing is surf music, right?
Right.
Whether that's from the Beach Boys, who didn't really surf, or things that are a little harder, like the surf rock that plays in the beginning of Pulp Fiction, which for anyone who hasn't heard it, it's sort of like pulsing instrumental guitar and heavy reverb, and it's in the opening credits of the movie. Anyway, when I was looking up surf music, I found this article on the New Yorker that I thought was fascinating, and it's titled Dick Dale, the inventor of surf rock, was a Lebanese American kid from Boston.
All right. I love it. I mean, that's like how Hawaiian pizza was invented in Canada by a Greek person. A big fan, by the way, of the Hawaiian pizza.
So Dick Dale's the musician who actually plays that Pulp Fiction song, which is called Monsieur Lou, I guess. Apparently, the musician was born to a family of Lebanese immigrants, and his birth name was Richard Mansour. And he gets a guitar as a kid, but is obsessed with percussion. He loves big band music, so he likes like Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, and all of that's a big part of why his music is so rhythmic and so percussive. But in high school, his family does move out to California, and he begins to surf. And kind of the same way that early skateboarders, I don't know if you've seen these videos, but if you've seen like Dogtown and Z-Boys, the skateboarders are trying to mimic surfing by reaching down to touch the pavement, and they're skimming it with their hands like it's water. And early surf musicians are also trying to figure out, how do you recreate that feeling of surfing with music? So Amanda Petrusich, who wrote that article at the New Yorker, puts it this way, quote, "Though it is tempting to fold in bands like the Beach Boys, who often sang about surfing, surf rock was wet and gnarly and unconcerned with romance or sweetness. The important part was successfully evincing the sensation of riding atop a rushing crest of water, and to capture something about that experience, which was both tense and glorious. Its biggest question was, how do we make this thing sound the way that thing feels, combining recklessness with grace?" Anyway, because he is obsessed with percussion, and because he grew up listening to Arabic music and Greek rebetiko music, which is sort of like the rebel folk music, he's using scales and tones that are unfamiliar, and he pumps up the reverb on these quick percussive notes and amplifies it at what Amanda Petrusich says is an indecent volume, and he ends up creating the sound of surf music, which quickly sweeps the nation.
I like that. That's a good story. All right. Well, since I picked last week's winner, I feel like this week you'd get to do the honors.
Well, I was 50-50. Dylan also won last week's trophy, so I don't think we can give it to him. But because you did that Mark Twain anecdote, and also SpongeBob's pretty great. I think I've got to give it to you.
I feel like I deserved it this week. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, that's it for today's Part-Time Genius. I do want to thank Gabe Luzier. It's been a little while. He's done so many episodes in the past with us, but Gabe did most of the research for this week's episode. And as Mango mentioned, we've been sitting on some of these links and stories for a while, and it's fun to finally be doing the show regularly enough that we remembered we needed to put it out there. So this was a lot of fun.
A good reminder.
That's right. Anyway, we'll be back with a brand new episode next week. But in the meantime, from Mango, Dylan, Mary, and myself, thanks so much for listening.
Part-Time Genius is a production of Kaleidoscope and iHeartRadio. This show is hosted by Will Pearson and me, Mangesh Hatikler, and researched by our good pal, Mary Phillips Sandy. Today's episode was engineered and produced by the wonderful Dylan Fagan with support from Tyler Klang. The show is executive produced for iHeart by Katrina Norvell and Ali Perry, with social media support from Sasha Gay Trusty, Dara Potts, and Vaini Shori. For more podcasts from Kaleidoscope and iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.